You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. This is your live tropical weather bulletin for August 26th. The remnants of Evo 98L Dorian developing in the Atlantic with winds of 50 miles per hour. It's day 238 of the worldwide season so far, the year. 48 storms have formed so far around the world as we pan around looking at the imagery here. And you can see everything that's going on. Towards the western Pacific, Bailu is now a tropical depression, and Invest 99W could become a tropical cyclone as it moves on towards the Philippines. We're watching that one very closely, as of course we are watching Dorian very closely as well. There is a picture of it right now live. My name is Nathan Foy, and this is your live tropical weather bulletin. And now let's introduce the team, consisting tonight of quite a few people. Oh no, they've all gone. Okay, well, we are joined by Ryan, Sam, and Orlando. Good evening to you, to you three.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
And somewhere you'll be able to see us all as well shortly. But for the minute, you're looking at those graphics, which are quite important. It is 344 miles from Barbados, tropical storm Dorian, that is. 50-mile-an-hour winds, and we'll be spending plenty of time discussing that tonight. Well, here I am, and joining me, as I've said, are those members, and also Cooper, who's just arrived too. But there's Ryan on the screen. Hello, Ryan. How are you?
Hello. I'm doing pretty.
Any thoughts on Dorian tonight?
Well, it has been, I think from my understanding, it's been blowing up a little in the past few hours. Yeah, probably intensifying. So we'll have to, definitely something to keep an eye on.
Well, let's just first of all take a look at probably the most important part of this right now. Is the warnings that are currently in effect. A tropical storm warning for Barbados, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and a tropical storm watch for Martinique and Grenada. And you can see which islands those all are on that little screen depiction there. Well, if you've got any comments or questions for us whilst we're on the air tonight, send us a message through the chat feature next to our live stream. I think we are also running simultaneously on Facebook. I don't know because David's running that and I haven't checked with him just yet. In the meantime, comments are coming in. They can fast already and we will take whatever comes our way. It is just after 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and the main feature tonight is Tropical Storm Dorian, which has a significant chance of striking Barbados and some of those Lesser Antilles Islands as a significant tropical storm. The National Hurricane Center still think it will become a hurricane. Somewhere along this screen is the track forecast. There is the latest from the National Hurricane Center there, expecting hurricane status south of Puerto Rico before making landfall in the Dominican Republic. There is a cone there, of course, and the center of the storm could pass anywhere within that cone. So that is something we ought to bear in mind when we're doing this forecast. There is still the outside chance that it might not make landfall on Hispaniola. Starting us off straight away is Band Scores Galore, who very generously sends a donation there as well, which we obviously use to increase the coverage and our abilities here to produce the fantastic stuff that we have been doing for so long. Do you think the hurricane season will be above average? Well, you know, we're getting nearly halfway through it now. What do you guys think about that question, even though it is somewhat unrelated to Dorian?
Above average. Well, it's really hard to tell because we could have, there's still a lot of time left. I mean, I think it's trending less likely due to what has already happened. I mean, we've only had like what, 3 or 4 so
Oh,
far
it's
this year. I mean,
dreadful.
That's
there is
very low.
not, yeah, there hasn't been a lot of activity. So, yeah, I mean, again, September, October could be really active, and we could see a very active season. Who knows? But
Yes.
it's just too soon to say at this point. But we are starting to get into that peak of hurricane season, and we're definitely seeing that now with the two systems that we have in the Atlantic.
Here's some satellite imagery of Dorian right now from GOES 16, and you can see just how it's somewhat every so often we always look at the mesoscale imagery, and it can be a bit misleading when we zoom right into it as we can nowadays with the fantastic imagery resolution. And it looks big, but when you look at it on this wider imagery here, which I would recommend, it is actually a pretty small storm, and the National Hurricane Center are only expecting a fairly modest wind field, even if it does become a hurricane. What's more, the GFS at the moment is only predicting 2 inches of rain, although the HWRF is predicting 23 inches of rain. So that is two opposite ends of a spectrum right there. But a rather small system, only yielding a stage 1 or low stage 2 on the CDPS scale. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, I think from what I've researched earlier, there has been the storm. This since it's a small storm, the guidance is a little more complex, and the forecasts are a little more difficult to predict because there have been some other storms as well that have managed to intensify or not really see anything at all. And kind of what I'm seeing is that there's some, yes, there is some dry air that is inhibiting its development, and we're really going to have to watch to see what it's going to do once it crosses the Lesser Antilles.
And this is what we've seen so many times in the Atlantic, usually early to mid-season systems that just completely fall apart when they do reach those islands or shortly afterwards. Do you think this Dorian is going to meet the same fate? The National Hurricane Center don't. They think it will peak after passing the islands and eventually, by the looks of things, succumb to the island of Hispaniola. Do we think that's the most probable scenario, or does anyone have any other theories?
It seems right now that the most likely scenario is that it's going to, the more likely scenario, kind of the general consensus is that it's going to track across, after it tracks across the islands, it will weaken, but it kind of also depends on kind of how early it's going to turn, because the further south it stays, it's likely to intensify.
All right then. We're here for the hour, so very comment led. If there's a lot of comments in, and there are a few already, so let's take some of these questions. What are all of our predictions on Tropical Storm Dorian? Well, that's a very broad question to begin with. There, I would say right now there's a, Category 1. I wouldn't say slightly optimistic, so that makes it sound like I'm downplaying it a bit, but I think it will probably only get to low end Category 1 by the looks of things. I've not seen any real models at all predict anything more than that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was the HWRF that was predicting a Cat 2. I don't know if the HWRF
Actually, yes,
is
they were
still
predicting
predicting a Cat 2.
They were actually predicting a Category 3 at one point, but usually when the HWRF does that, the HMON is also on board, and I don't think it was.
Yeah, I'm also looking at a lot of the models right now. They're really having a hard time intensifying Dorian by the looks of it. Despite very favorable conditions, it's going to be really hard to intensity guidance on Dorian. It's going to be really difficult because it's a small storm. It's prone to, rapid changes in intensity.
And that pretty much answers Norway Tracking's question as well, a fairly similar one. Whether it will rapidly intensify and or reach 90 miles an hour. Well, the rapid intensification question, I suppose we haven't touched on yet. Any chance of that?
Yes.
Yes.
I would say it's possible.
I suppose anything is possible in this region.
It's in the realm of not necessarily possibility at this point, it's probable. Like, there's a legitimate, solid chance that it could or could not happen. And it has a solid chance by the
Doesn't probable
ships,
usually mean a good chance?
Yeah, it's higher than average, at least.
Really? You sure?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Uh,
Okay.
But when it comes to that, though, it all depends on what it'll do. Like, for the next 48 hours, it's probably in the best. It's for the next 48 hours. That's its best chance. Outside of that, I'm uncertain if it'll.
Well, I guess it is
intensify rapidly.
also a small system, a budding system right now, and with these, they can indeed rapidly intensify the smaller they are as well. They can, of course, rapidly weaken too. Another question here. Do we think Invest 99W will form? We've got it on the screen somewhere. There is Invest 99W in the Western Pacific. This one is just to the north or northwest now of Palau and Yap, the small pink outlines denoting those places. The Philippines is probably just off the western side of the image. And it doesn't look much at the minute, but models have been consistent, GFS in particular, about developing this into a significant system when it's in the South China Sea. Does anyone have any thoughts on
I've been
that?
noticing that.
Yeah, I have
happen.
noticed.
One or two models suggesting, in fact, one of the HWRF runs saying it would be a Category 4 in the South China Sea. Well, that is very rare for a storm to become a Category 4 out of nothing in the South China Sea, so I wouldn't say that that's going to particularly happen.
I don't believe did Mancut enter the South China Sea after it hit the Philippines?
Yes, it did.
Yeah, move northwest. All right, more questions here. Oh, it's just gone off my screen. Okay, well, that's just disappeared off the end of my screen. Found it again. Do we think that Dorian will move into the Caribbean Sea and head up the Gulf Coast and hit the United States that way? Well, if anyone remembers the Force 13 preseason predictions, that was one of the things we were highlighting, a possible track that took a storm through the Caribbean and then on towards the US Gulf Coast being a significant possibility. Doesn't appear to be what will happen with Dorian, because I don't know, it just doesn't seem like that's going to happen.
Some
people have been speaking about how with Hurricane Ivan, the track of Ivan, the National Hurricane Center was putting that one further north as well. But there is quite a difference between the two systems. Ivan was much stronger at this point in its life.
Yeah, wasn't Ivan like a Cat 4 by this point?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Actually, Harvey was. You remember what Harvey did? Like,
first Harvey mention of the day.
Yeah, so it kind of took. It didn't. I didn't say it didn't take like the same track, but like it definitely went further west and stayed more to the south, which kind of allowed it to maintain its maintain its circulation, which allowed it to go into those warmer waters. And in fact, it was like actually exactly 2 years ago today that it made landfall in Gulfport, Texas.
Pretty much at this point in time, I think it was like 10 o'clock at night, I think, Central Time.
Very close.
Yeah.
I imagine that we were covering it. I honestly can't remember. My mind is just completely messed right now.
Yeah, we were.
We were covering Harvey a lot, obviously. But that is just reminiscing there. More questions there or comments. Norway tracking the 18Z ships forecast showed a 44% chance of a 75-mile-an-hour increase within 3 days. That's rapid intensification. So nearly a half chance according to that model. So on the probabilistic stakes, it's somewhat possible. Less than half chance still at this point though, but it is so difficult to predict rapid intensification, and we're not saying that it is happening in any way, shape or form just yet. But how do we think it's been doing today? We've seen a few blow-ups in that convection. We've been looking on that imagery in the last few minutes there, how it's been progressing throughout the day. Is it on track with what the predictions are, or faster or slower?
I'd say a little faster, because I've been seeing quite a few blowups near this, not too far from the center earlier in the day. There were a few images that showed like right near the center, like around the center actually, when it just completely blew up in the center, and that seemed a little concerning because it seemed like it was gonna rapidly intensify.
Well, yes, some people were starting to put out the knee-jerk reactions there, weren't they? That, oh, it's intensifying rapidly now. Not just yet. 50-mile-an-hour winds, if you've just joined us, that's 80 kilometers per hour. It is moving west at 14 miles per hour according to the National Hurricane Center's latest update. This is 8 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time, the intermediate advisory from the National Hurricane Center that came out just 15 minutes ago. Tropical storm warning in effect for some of those Lesser Antilles. We'll get a close-up on that for you shortly. But first of all, this is the tropical storm force wind probabilities here. As you can see, a high chance of that now for parts of Barbados and in St. Lucia. Every so often you will see those chances pop up on the left hand side of your screen as well, but for the southern coast of Barbados currently 70% or higher, and a high chance extending almost to the Dominican Republic. The key messages from the National Hurricane Center, we ought to read these out to you as well as a public service here. Dorian is expected to bring tropical storm conditions to portions of the Lesser Antilles where tropical storm watches and warnings are in effect. Residents in these areas should refer to advice from local government officials and products from their local meteorological service for additional information. 2 to 4 inches of rainfall, the National Hurricane Center are expected, with isolated amounts as high as 6 inches. And whilst it's too soon to determine the specific time or magnitude of possible direct impacts in Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands or Hispaniola, interests in these areas should monitor the progress of Dorian. Again, we're looking at around day 3 for Puerto Rico if it moves further north. Day 4 for Dominican Republic. So what day are we talking about now? Coming into Sunday evening, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday for Wednesday for Puerto Rico, Wednesday night, and Thursday afternoon, evening, nightfall on Hispaniola. And then after that, National Hurricane Center weaken it to a depression, but there's still a lot of real estate ahead of Dorian, depending on what the conditions look like by the time it does get onto the other side of Hispaniola, so it may still be something that we'll need to watch. There's a close-up of those warnings again. Those tropical storm warnings for Barbados, St. Lucia and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and tropical storm watch for Martinique and Grenada. Just cycle through all these graphics now. This is the track forecast models for Dorian right now, along with the National Hurricane Center's official track forecast there. It's the black line, if you can see it there, and all the models alongside it. Interesting how 2 of them there take it further south into the Caribbean Sea proper. A handful take it closer to Puerto Rico. 1 or 2 for a Haiti landfall. Those are all statistical models, however. And even early on in this spread here, the 48 hours, there is still quite a divergence in where the center of the storm might track, anywhere from just north of Grenada to over Martinique. So that is quite a large spread. You would expect that it would probably be a little bit closer knit than that, so still some uncertainty there. And just looking at that intensity guidance as well, a general consensus is for high-end tropical storm, maybe just about into hurricane status, National Hurricane Center going with the latter. And most of them, those models there, as we saw just then, bringing it down as it anticipates a landfall. But some of those didn't register the landfall, so that's why it stayed at hurricane status through day 4 and 5. That is not very likely. These images are going by again. Let's just cycle through all these once more. The page refreshed on me. This is Invest 99W. You can see the model spread on this one is even larger. Quite uncertain when you look at all of these. Anywhere from central Vietnam to Taiwan. That's quite remarkable. What is almost assured at this point, though, is that it's going to make landfall somewhere in the Philippines, Luzon to be specific, and it could be a significant tropical storm when it gets there. Probably not going to be stronger than that. The HWRF disagrees, though. You can see there how it is taking a bit of a wacky line there towards the Category 3 threshold, especially later on in the run. Could still happen, though. What's next on the screen here? This is just a reminder of the outlooks right now. 70% chance in the next 48 hours for 98L, which we also got to mention, of course. This could become a tropical cyclone as it scoots off towards the northeast. Our team, any comments on that system right now?
98L?
Well,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, it's definitely, let's have a look at how it looks right now. It looks disorganized, but I guess I could see it becoming like a weak tropical storm, and that's what most models I see are hinting. Like a weak tropical storm, tropical depression, kind of like that, you know.
Yeah, I think it would have done better had it not been for that long trail of clouds that extend towards the northeast, because the GFS model, for instance, is developing a significant extratropical cyclone to come out of that and strike Nova Scotia in the next 2 or 3 days, ahead of 98L. 98L itself goes on to affect parts of eastern Nova Scotia and into Newfoundland. Could be a significant rainfall producer, but tropical storm force winds only by the looks of things. And
Yeah,
that is
looks
if it
like,
does make landfall there.
Looks like there might. Looks like how much is 98L heading into a high shear environment as it heads up skirts northeast?
That's something I've not actually looked at. If anyone wants to bring up that graphic in the team, that would be really helpful to see. This is what the Eastern Pacific looks like right now. Evo is dead. It's a remnant there in the Eastern Pacific. And not too much else going on. A few little systems down there further south that probably won't become anything. Models don't think so. Central Pacific, no activity expected in the next 48 hours. You can see a few disturbances down there, though. And over in the Western Pacific, you can see what this looks like here. 99W, the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, giving a high chance of development. And Bailu, which is still, I believe, a tropical depression, although they've tagged it now as a remnant low. That is
remnants
everything.
Of TD12.
That is
that's
everything
what the JTWC says.
Is that what it is? 12W Bailu, yeah.
Remnants TD12W.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Alright, yeah, I see it. So that is everything that's going on around the world. So that is the update in brief. I mean, there isn't actually a huge amount to talk about, considering we are at the end of August right now, and it is usually an extremely busy time of year. I always think back to 2015 when around this date, or very close to it, maybe 1 or 2 days later, there were 3 Category 4s, were they? Or at least Category 3 in the Eastern Pacific Basin alone.
Yeah, there were 3 Cat 4s simultaneously in the East Pac.
Or was that 2016? Oh, I can't remember now.
That was 2015. That was 2015.
That was the year Patricia formed, but I don't know if I don't think that was one of them, was it?
No, that was
No, that
October.
was Ignacio Jimenez and Kilo.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad someone's got
Yeah,
a
that
good
was
memory
earlier.
here. All right, well, we're here to serve, so let's take some more questions as hopefully some of this Dorian imagery loads. Okay, well, those images have broken. That's a shame. Didn't last very long. Let's go to the Navy image of Dorian then, which is hopefully updating rather often. There is just a little look at it right now. It did have some higher convective cloud tops earlier. They seem to have simmered off just a little bit, but still not looking too bad on that imagery. Alright, will 98L become Tropical Storm Erin is a question I get here.
I
It's
mean,
likely.
I
There's
think
a possibility.
possible
Likely.
and likely, in fact, but I don't know. We'll have to,
Alright.
you never know.
Will there be a chance that Dorian hits Florida? Well, yes, there is, but it is so far out that it would be irresponsible to give you any number of probability, a percentage, or anything like that. It is a complete unknown where it will go after passing through the Caribbean, whichever way it ends up going. Whether it curves back towards the west, as some storms have done and do, whether it will recurve further towards the north and east and miss the US completely, or indeed it could go headlong into Hispaniola, dissipate completely, and that'll be that. Alright, let's see if we've got any more questions. We've been talking for a long time, so I'm sure quite a few have come along. Start your message with Force 13 all in text. It will tag us on the live stream chat and it will light up big and bright for us so that we can easily detect anything that's headed for us here. I might have missed out some messages, so do send them again if we haven't read them out. Are there any other storms at this moment? Is a question there. Well, no, not really. No, in short. Do you think Dorian will take a similar track to Hurricane Irma? Well, that is already impossible because it didn't form near the Cape Verde Islands, but if you mean the rest of its track, well, Irma struck much further north in the Lesser Antilles, Antigua and Barbuda, of course. This one most likely won't. And then Irma afterwards moved on towards Cuba, of course, where it made landfall. Dorian could end up making landfall in Cuba if it really turned towards the west later on. But that again is a complete unknown at this very early stage of Dorian's life. When you think about it, how long has it been going? Just for nearly is it a full day yet?
It's been, yeah, I think it formed on as a depression or as a storm.
Since naming.
Since naming, it's been, I think it was named 21Z yesterday. So yeah, it's been a.
I was hoping we'd get the shear graphic on our screen now. Oh, there it is. There is a shear graphic. Very small shear graphic. I've got to peer right in the screen to see what's going on. So we're talking about wind shear ahead of 98L. There is a massive amount to its north, and it's just got that little trail of lower wind shear to its northeast on that wind shear graphic. Interestingly, high wind shear values just ahead of Dorian as well. It's been holding its own. When you look at that, it's just about in marginal it's just about in favourable conditions, Dorian, at the moment. Do we think it will continue to push that shear away, or will it start to get affected by that?
Definitely could affect its development, I would say.
And
Maybe
just to
that's
say
why
one other
it's
thing.
not quite 100.
I'm sorry, just to say one other thing there as well. Low wind shear near Puerto Rico and that area right now as well, so if it does make it towards that area and that wind shear is still low there, that could be an opportunity for further intensification too.
Yeah, it does look like that wind shear in Dorian's path is looking pretty good for the storm. I think it's like around 10 knots until it hits the Lesser Antilles. So yeah, it's definitely got some favorable conditions.
All right, this is Force 13 Live. It's half past the hour. This is your live tropical weather bulletin. We're covering everything that's going on around the world today. Not too much, albeit. Dorian is the main feature, as you would expect, and that's what we are looking at. Here is the latest satellite image showing where Dorian is and what it looks like right now in the central Atlantic. And there it goes off the screen again. But again, you can see the Caribbean panel on the top left there, showing Dorian quite nicely amongst the Atlantic and the Lesser Antilles, which it is slowly getting closer to, about 340 something miles or something like that, I think it was. All of the flow to imagery of Dorian is now broken, so that's great. So we'll move on somewhere else. There's Evo, in case you were wondering about that one. That is now a remnant low, and it certainly looks like one too. Was it really an interesting storm, guys?
I don't think so. It's kind
Yeah,
of, it was disappointing to me, I'll just say that, because it was expected to be a hurricane. You know,
Yeah,
it wasn't the most exciting to track.
never really had much of a
And most
chance to begin with.
Well, here's the thing though, the long-range models were saying that it was going to be like a major hurricane, and then I'm not going to say the rest.
Yeah, I
I'm
know.
not going to say the rest.
Is that's the one that the models wanted to strike California as the
Oh,
tropicals?
please, no. No, 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 no. Yes, it was.
It
Yes, it
does
was.
happen.
Yeah, it does happen, but it was kind of ridiculous. And it was
It did
multiple
happen
models, too.
a very long time ago, not in any of our generations.
Yeah.
We kind of saw Rosa try that last year.
Well, well, well. There's Evo. So that is another one that's gone in what has been a pretty quiet year so far. We're only at 48 storms. We're about 7 storms behind 2017 at this point, and I think we're over 10 storms behind 2018 at this point of the year. And that is quite a lot when the average is 91. We're 10% below, and when we look at the worldwide numbers, they are pretty damn consistent year on year. Wherever they happen, obviously they all happen in different places and at different times of the year, but it's pretty consistent. So it suggests that at some point we're going to see a pretty sizable surge in storm activity. Otherwise, an extremely unusual anomaly will be occurring this year. There's again a
Yeah,
lot.
I mean,
kind of
definitely.
It's very interesting how there was a near record number of storms last year, and then this year the tropics have been underperforming quite a bit. I was expecting a larger presence of storms, especially around this time.
Yeah. All right. I'm just catching up with a huge amount of comments here. Do we think 98L will hit Virginia?
No. It's gonna stay well offshore of the East Coast. It's the biggest threat to the East Coast with 98L, if any, will be rip currents and surf issues. I really don't see anything else being a...
All right. Just working really hard here. We're going to try and get some imagery of 98L on the screen as well, hopefully in a few moments. In the meantime, there's the latest, if you've not seen it yet, from the National Hurricane Center, showing the forecast track for Tropical Storm Dorian. As of Advisory 6A, intermediate 50-mile-an-hour winds. So it's halfway to hurricane status if it gets there. 11.6 north, 54.8 degrees west is the position they've put it at. I will try and get some imagery, good imagery of 98L shortly. because of course that is also of interest to many people watching too. But most of the attention is on Dorian, and a lot of questions here. We'll try and get through as many as we can. Okay, we've had that one, I'm sorry. Is it believed Dorian will strengthen? Well, yes.
It's already strengthening,
He's in the
so
process.
yeah.
Will Dorian regenerate after landfall in the Dominican Republic? That is a very valuable question because no one knows. You look at the National Hurricane Center track map, it's not a given that it will weaken to a depression in the first place. Let's get that one straight. It could remain a tropical storm as it moves through there. It could die off completely, but I would say that we don't yet know, but odds are conditions will still be favourable enough when it moves on the other side that will probably maintain some semblance of itself. Maybe as a weak depression that might regenerate into a tropical storm. But what sometimes happens, what quite often happens, is that storms die off in the Caribbean, and then they track towards the north, and they do regenerate over there in the western Atlantic off the US East Coast. That has happened several times in recent years as well. And you never know, that might happen here too. But that is way off into the future right now. That is beyond day 5. That's next week.
Yeah, it's just way too... We'll have to see what Dorian does in the short term before we can say what it does in the long term.
Alright, I'm still really battling to try and get an image here of 98L. I will get that there shortly. Will Dorian potentially strike the Carolinas? I mean, you know, that is... We're talking about regenerating in the first place. That is even more further out. If it was to strike the Carolinas, we're looking at about maybe 8, 9, 10 days away, at least. More towards those higher numbers.
Yeah. It's too far out to tell, really. With past a week.
But if it does weaken to a depression as shown there, it would be unlikely that it strengthens a huge amount, because storms don't really do that. The ones that strike the Carolinas with a lot of intensity have usually had that intensity for quite a long time as it's tracked over the Atlantic from a Cape Verde origin. Not to say it isn't beyond the realms of probability, but climatology would suggest that the Carolinas at worst would maybe get a weak hurricane, if there is such a thing, a minimal hurricane, as a worst case if it was to head towards that way and conditions were favourable. Conditions might not be, and it might die off well before then. Do we think that it will make landfall in South Florida? Well, that is a little bit more likely. We still can't say anything about that because it is well beyond that 5-day cone. But for models that I've seen, to be quite honest, when we're talking about all of these further out places, have we seen any models that are suggesting that this storm does survive beyond day 5 or 6?
Well, yeah, I definitely have seen models that take it past, Hispaniola into the Bahamas and then eventually into South Florida. Those are very long range, though, but so I would not, take them seriously at this time, but do know that it is a possibility.
Oh, this is great. We've got some imagery now. Is this Cooper?
Yes, it is.
Thanks for helping us out. This is an image of
No problem.
Invest 98L. Is there anything you'd like to say about it?
It does appear that some sort of development is going to occur. It does appear that some sort of development is going to occur with 98L, but whether or not it's tropical or extratropical development seems to be up for debate.
Really? That's interesting. Well, it looks like it's sort of attached to another feature there to its northeast, and that will end up being the extratropical cyclone that I mentioned earlier. and maybe behind it this system will form. But who knows? What on earth is that? Okay then, we must be having some difficulties elsewhere, as they call it.
Yeah.
And that screen's gone as well. Oh, okay. It's going really well. Back to that track forecast. Do we think Dorian will become a Category 4? We put the chances at the bottom of the screen, the percentage chances of it reaching particular categories, we put it at about 1%. So it is a very remote possibility. Not worth even considering at the moment. I'm not sure what else can really be said about that. What is the track for Dorian? Does it make a turn like Matthew and Florence into North Carolina? Well, that again is way beyond what technology of 2019 can tell you. It would be an irresponsible guess to say exactly where it would track beyond that 5-day period. But that whole southeastern part of the US, make no mistake, does need to be watching the progress of this storm. And of course, we'll be giving you updates throughout its duration. I'm still rattling through some questions. The forecast strength for Dorian, National Hurricane Center predicting only a minimal hurricane, 75 miles an hour. I think that's still the case. That could still be potentially dangerous, especially if you are unprepared. Will Dorian affect the US East Coast? Again, that is a possibility, but way beyond our scope. And that's a very vague question. What do we think Dorian and 98L will be? Tropical cyclones, at least. That's all I can really say.
Well, 98L isn't one yet, but it probably will
be. There is
be.
another question that might spark some conversation. Are there any tropical waves that could become something of note in the near future? What I did see on the GFS model earlier is that it's strangely developing a system in the central Atlantic quite a way out. I think it's next week, and then it moves northeast and then turns west.
What?
Yeah, I saw something along those.
That sounds really weird. I don't think that's gonna happen. But hey, weirder things have occurred.
So I would look out next week, folks, early September, for tropical waves, Cape Verde type systems. Can't pin it down to anything in particular just yet, but I'll just look at the first 2 weeks of September. It is the peak of hurricane season. Climatologically, we usually see something. So keep your eyes peeled on that.
And it doesn't really matter how active a season is. It really only takes one storm to make it a significant season.
Well, last year, after Florence really proved that until Michael made it too. I mean, the rest of 2018 was absolutely forgettable, really, wasn't it?
Besides Florence and Michael, I don't know. There were some weird, all that weird subtropical activity, but other than that,
Leslie,
it was
I guess.
Florence and Michael, and Leslie was a weird storm. Yeah.
Damn.
There was also Mancut, which was.
Well, we're talking about the Atlantic only there.
Oh.
Yeah, of course,
But
the Western Pacific
Pacific
went nuts, yeah. Indeed. Let's see now. How could Dorian still strengthen with the high wind shear ahead of it? Well, if the wind shear does increase, then yeah, it will have a real difficult time. Although those shear graphics do have a tendency to not be fully accurate all of the time, and sometimes lag behind by quite a bit too. So I always get a little bit touchy when they're displayed on the screen, but we wanted it on the screen just to show people right now what the situation is. But there we are. And that there is 98L on the screen. That's not Dorian. If you've just joined us, just a reminder of what the warnings are right now. This is quite clear. Tropical storm warning for Barbados, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and the tropical storm watch for Martinique and Grenada. Martinique, the most northerly island there, Grenada, the most southerly. And I believe Hurricane Ivan made landfall on Grenada, right?
Is it Grenada? It sounds right. I think it did. Yeah.
Category 3.
Yeah, I do believe it was Grenada.
Sounds right.
Alright, well, my buttons aren't working, so Ryan, if you could add strat to our conversation, that would be great. I know it's a very unprofessional comment to make on the air. Back to the, just to remind you as well, these are what the model runs look like. You can see here, again, over the next 5 days, anywhere from the Central Caribbean all the way up towards the Eastern Bahamas and the Turks and Caicos Islands there on day 5. The intensity estimates are, as you can tell, not much wriggle room at the upper end for it to get stronger than Category 1. None of the models are really buying it at all. And really, if you're going to take a median line through those, it actually wouldn't be hurricane status there. But the National Hurricane Center think it will get to minimal hurricane status, Category 1, 75 miles an hour, the same intensity as Hurricane Barry earlier this year. And I don't really see any reason to disagree with that at this moment in time. Let's see now. Isn't it sad that the biggest thing going on in the tropics right now is a below 60 mile an hour tropical storm? Well, you know, we have had a few things. We have had Lakima, Francisco, and Crosa the other week. We have had a Category 5 earlier this year. The Southern Hemisphere was extremely active, but yeah, the Northern Hemisphere is really underperforming so far this year, but it does put some worry into forecasters' minds that something big might be around the corner. It doesn't look like Dorian's going to be that, thankfully, but we've got to watch out for something that might be lurking in September. Let's see if we've got any more questions. We've got just over 10 minutes here to take more questions, and that is what we're here to do, as well as tell you the information. So, just trying to find one here. When will the stream end? Well, at the end of the hour. There you go. Okay, getting a lot of repeat questions there as well. And how strong will Dorian hit Hispaniola, and will it peak before or after the landfall? That is a good question, and something that hasn't been fully explained yet. You can see on the National Hurricane Center forecast again here, it's calling for the hurricane status to be reached when it's passing to the south of Puerto Rico, and then weaken again slightly on its approach to the Dominican Republic. They're calling for a landfall intensity of 70 miles per hour, which is just shy of hurricane status in the middle of the Dominican Republic. And then moving over Hispaniola, weakening to a depression. Will there be an East Pacific storm in the next week? Well, that is something I looked at just before we started tonight's stream. The Eastern Pacific looks like it is going to be completely quiet for at least the next 5 days. So this week is going to be quiet there. And it's really been a pretty poor season in the Eastern Pacific so far. Not what we're used to after recent years. But
yeah, it seems like the Southern Hemisphere has been the strongest... has been the stronger hemisphere this year.
I mean, I do
Southern.
think that the Southern Hemisphere has generated more ACE than the Northern Hemisphere so far, which is pretty strange for this time of year, especially.
Pretty strange.
Yeah, but that could change in the near future.
I mean, you know, the statistic is
rather
that
unusual trend.
approximately 70% of all tropical activity is in the northern hemisphere. So the fact that the southern hemisphere is still on top, if that is the case, I don't know. I've not seen the stats myself, but it wouldn't surprise me after what happened there over last few months. It's pretty crazy.
Yes, and then we could, and there could be potential for further development in the southern hemisphere come November, December.
Yeah, that's when the
But now, though, we're just going
next
to see the
season.
northern hemisphere hit up.
We're joined by Strat. Hi, Strat. How are you?
Hi, doing pretty good today, actually.
You sound different.
Yeah, new location, new microphone.
Great. Well, that sounds fantastic. What are your thoughts on Dorian right now?
I mean, clearly dangerous system. It's slowly getting its act together. Definitely better looking than when I made my video update yesterday. It was kind of looked more like a wave than a tropical depression back then, but it looks like it's slowly coalescing. Warnings should definitely be in place. Unfortunately, they are, because any storm can be a deadly storm. Even though this is going to move by pretty quickly, the area that gets the worst effects could be hit pretty hard. Rainfall is the worst factor in any tropical cyclone. Exactly. It doesn't have to be a strong storm to be a deadly storm. And even though this was forecast to become a hurricane at some point at this current point in time, even if it didn't, that doesn't mean that it can't cause life-threatening damage.
One thing I would say, though, is that the models really aren't picking up on heavy rainfall, though. 6 inches, yes. I mean, you know, but we're not talking about huge amounts, like 20+ inches or anything.
No, maybe isolated areas are slightly more, but the most I see from models right now is about 8.
8. So that is somewhat interesting, I've found. I'm not sure why it seems to be a little bit on the low side.
I mean, its movement speed could just be playing a factor in it.
I suppose it is moving. Oh, it is likely. Well, yeah, getting towards 15
And at least
miles
the
an hour.
HWRF, has the track weave between Puerto Rico and Hispaniola, so it doesn't really have the mountains to kind of draw out more rainfall from it as well.
We have another question. When will be the next Guess the Storm? Well, we might do one next Friday if there's nothing going on. Friday night is game night on Force 13 Live.
I could consider hosting another one. I wouldn't be opposed.
No Strat. No Strat.
The fans liked it. Everyone typed one in the chat. It was good.
Strat. No Strat. No.
Oh, come on. Why not, guys? Trust me.
No.
Let's keep going here. Okay, that was a strange comment I just saw there. Has there been a year where all hurricane basins had below average activity at once? In the northern hemisphere, it's only happened once in the satellite era, 1977, in terms of ACE.
Yeah, that was a really weird year. All of the basins in the northern hemisphere were well below average. It was pretty weird, gotta say.
Indeed. There is Ryan, by the way, and here is me as well, just in case you've not seen us yet. This is Force 13 Live. This is the Tropical Weather Bulletin, and we'll be finishing up in just a few minutes. I'm trying to get Ryan off the screen.
Hi, stuck on the screen here.
There we go. We saw it.
Oh.
There we go.
I mean, the one thing I would be worried about with Dorian right now, is just back slightly on topic for a second, is that HWRF has it as get a really small. It weakens it after passing the islands, but then rapidly intensifies it as a very small system between Puerto Rico and Hispaniola. So, you know, small storms fluctuate intensity very quickly. So Dorian could get a burst of convection. I'm looking at the satellite imagery right now. It's not looking quite as impressive in the last couple hours, just in terms of sheer amount of convection.
Yes,
but
it's been waning.
If this storm gets really small, we could see prone to intensification situations. And I'd be incredibly concerned for Hispaniola.
Yeah, and just a reminder, Hispaniola is the island that contains both the Dominican Republic and Haiti. Dominican Republic will probably get the worst of the storm, but we know how hideously unprepared Haiti is at the best of times. So if it does move a bit further west, that could again be a catastrophe of, even if it is like a weak to moderate tropical storm.
Yeah, that if it hits Haiti, that could be deadly.
I mean, all these areas economically aren't doing particularly great either, so it's going to be much more difficult to recover from a storm hitting at a particularly bad intensity or rainfall amount, or if just anything goes wrong. So that's why when we watch any system approach these areas, we have to be on especially high alert and especially vigilant in making sure that people are okay and that proper preparations are done.
Right, and some of those factors could even be ground retirement if enough damage is done.
Another thing of note with the rainfall threat in the Antilles is that these islands are prone to orographic lifting, in which, as it moves over the mountains of these islands, which can result in greater rainfall totals than what may be forecast.
There's just a question there. When was the last time the southern hemisphere beat the northern hemisphere? I don't think that has happened ever. But I will check for you.
So.
I am got a bit of a reputation of being the historian here, so I'll just have a quick look at 1977. 68 cyclones in the northern hemisphere that year and 37 in the southern hemisphere. It's probably the closest it ever got.
Yeah. I just have a quick question that I was wondering if you guys could explain just for the chat, just for better understanding about the NHC track right now. It's actually west of most of the model runs. Do you know if there's a particular reason for that we're seeing right now?
Is it, though? From what I've seen, it was near the center.
The most of the models, so a good 60 to 2/3 of them, are a bit east, have it barely clipping the Dominican Republic.
Interesting.
But the official track has to go straight through Dominican Republic, even clipping Haiti. There's only 4 models that go further west than the GFS right now.
Well, the National Hurricane Center do apply more weight for different models, as well as various other techniques and climatological basis too. I'm not really sure. I'm not the National Hurricane Center.
Yeah, it looks like
maybe they are mindful that it might move a little bit further west than expected because other storms have done so in the past.
Yeah, it looks like they're leaning on the Euro and the GFS for this. I'm looking through the forecast discussion right now for us, but that the HWRF and the UK Met are.
All right, another question here. What chances this survives and moves into the Gulf of Mexico?
It's looking increasingly less likely.
Unlikely.
It's looking increasingly unlikely because models have it trying to pick up towards Florida and then off and away is probably a remnant system.
Another question there. Which year was the most active worldwide? On my records, that is actually 2005, which contained 135 cyclones, 109 of which became tropical storms. 2018 was 106, by the way, which is not far off that 109.
Yeah, I remember us keeping a close watch on that as the final days tick down on the year to see, is this something that could somehow get passed? But I think, was it at the end of the year, you actually found 2 more storms in the 2005 season that we added onto the list, right?
Yeah, I think. Another question here, and it's going to have to be our last one because we're finishing up now. How much of a threat could this be to southeast Florida? Also, the HWRF nailed the intensity with Irma. I don't know what that's got to do with anything, but it does allow me to make a point. HWRF isn't very good at the minute, but it was very good in 2017. I even gave it Model of the Year that year. But at the minute, it is not doing very well, the HWRF, so that is something we're not or at least I'm not paying a huge amount of attention with. Any final thoughts from the team before we finish up here?
I would say to people in harm's way, stay vigilant and stay prepared. Listen to local officials if they give any specific orders about evacuations and certain preparations to make.
Yeah, and I also want to add to that, like, since the storm is, these kinds of storms can produce some difficult forecasts. That anyone who's in the path, like anyone who could potentially be in the path, due to any fluctuation in the storm intensity or direction, really, especially if you're even in the continental U.S., you should probably just remain vigilant in case the storm does manage to re-intensify further north. But yeah.
Alright then, well, I guess that is everything from us tonight. You can follow Force 13 on all of its outlets, of course, and you can watch back this stream as it occurred in this hour. It will be on our YouTube page, I assume, pretty shortly, as soon as they can get it up for us. But this is the storm names, as you can see on the list here. Thanks for watching. Have a good night. We'll be back with more coverage in the next few days, I'm sure, and more updates on the channel. Until then, that's all from me and the team. Good night. You can also help the project become even better by becoming a patron. You can see more information about all the benefits involved by visiting patreon.com/Force13. With a special thanks to these people for being our most valued patrons this month. You can also check out our growing merch store so you can show Force 13's colors wherever you go. You can also find a link to our Discord server underneath this video in the description.